Imagine this. A young farm boy ditches his quiet life in the countryside, heads to the city with nothing but a dream, and within 6 days he's fired. No diploma, no connections, no plan B. Fast forward a few decades though, and that same boy isn't just surviving. He's built a massive empire and changed the world as we know it. That boy is Henry Ford. You probably know Ford as the pioneer of assembly lines, the 5-day work week, and the man who put America on wheels. But what if we told you his story is far from the straightforward tale of success you might expect? In fact, Ford's life is full of wild innovations, but also dark controversies, failures, and an obsessive genius that set him apart. In this video, we'll dig into Ford's incredible rise, his unusual projects, like the time he tried building a strange American town in the Amazon rainforest called Fordlandia. And we'll touch on some darker truths, like why one of his biggest fans was none other than Adolf Hitler. This is more than just a story of cars and factories. It's a saga of ambition, triumph, and the brutal struggles for power. This is the true story of Henry Ford. Born on July 30th, 1863, on a farm in Dearborn, Michigan, young Henry quickly grew tired of farm life. He hated the routine, even avoiding his responsibilities as the eldest child. Neighbors noticed, saying Henry was the laziest boy on the face of the earth. But he wasn't lazy, he was just obsessed with something different. Indoors, while his 5 siblings worked the fields, Henry was conducting experiments, turning everyday household items into tools and prototypes. He'd sharpened his mom's knitting needles into makeshift screwdrivers, taking apart clocks and farm tools to figure out how they worked. And when school started, Henry couldn't stand that either. He thought it was boring, a waste of time, and eventually dropped out after 8th grade. Instead, Henry preferred a hands-on education. Enlisting friends and his younger siblings, he built all sorts of machines: water wheels, tiny steam engines. Sure, they ended in explosions now and then, and maybe a few scrapes and bruises, but there was no doubt that Henry had an almost supernatural talent for mechanics. One of the biggest moments in young Henry's life came at 13, when his father gifted him a pocket watch. Ford immediately set to work taking it apart and putting it back together, over and over, until he could do it perfectly in minutes. Pretty soon, he was the town watch repair guy. That's how good he was. But just months later, Henry's life would change even more. During a trip to Detroit with his father, he saw something almost magical for the time: a tractor powered by a steam engine. In that moment, Henry promised himself he would build a horseless vehicle of his own one day. Unfortunately, not long after, tragedy would strike. At just 13 years old, Henry faced a tragedy that would forever change his life. His mother passed away during childbirth complications. Their bond had been unbreakable, and losing her felt like losing the very heart of his world. Life on the farm without her was like a watch without a mainspring, stopped and lifeless. As the days dragged on, Henry's disdain for rural life grew. He envisioned a future far beyond milking cows and harvesting crops. Yet as the eldest son, his father had different plans, expecting him to inherit the family farm. The pressure mounted until, at 16, Henry made a bold decision. He left home, chasing his dreams in Detroit. This choice shattered his father's hopes and strained their relationship. Just a week into his new job, fate dealt him another blow. He got fired. Suddenly, Henry found himself stranded in an unfamiliar city, without an income or a clear path forward. But then, in a twist of irony, his father came to the rescue, connecting him with a repairman position at a machine shop owned by an old friend. Despite his disappointment in Henry's departure from the family business, his father recognized his son's remarkable mechanical talent and saw this opportunity as a chance for growth. Henry quickly settled into his new life, finding affordable housing with his aunt and picking up extra work as a jewelry repairman. Juggling both jobs, he managed to earn a modest $5.50 a week. However, the real treasure lay in his newfound role as a repairman, which allowed him to tinker with an array of machines. This experience became the education he never had, shaping him into the skilled mechanic he aspired to be. After 9 months of hands-on learning, Henry decided it was time to return home. In 1882, a neighbor approached him with a request to help operate a newly acquired steam engine. Without hesitation, Henry agreed. Despite having never laid eyes on a steam engine before, he confidently approached the massive trembling machine, affectionately nicknamed the Little Engine. With a mix of nerves and excitement, he fed the fire and adjusted the valves until, miraculously, the engine roared to life. His neighbor was ecstatic and immediately offered Henry a full-time job with a daily wage of $3. Word of Henry's incredible feat spread quickly. Soon after, a representative from Westinghouse, a leading manufacturer of steam engines, came knocking, offering him a position as a steam engine repairman. Henry seized the opportunity, spending the next several summers repairing engines throughout Michigan and Ohio. Yet deep down, he never forgot his dream. Each winter, he dedicated himself to building a steam-powered vehicle, inspired by the ones he had marveled at in his youth. But despite pouring countless hours into his work, Henry faced a daunting challenge. While the first steam-powered vehicle had been invented in 1769, it was designed to run on tracks. Henry envisioned a vehicle that could navigate the open road, but the weight of steam engines proved too cumbersome for such a purpose. Faced with the enormity of his ambition and the limitations of the technology of his time, Henry found himself at a crossroads, holding tightly to his dream while grappling with the reality that seemed to stand in his way. While flipping through a magazine one day, Henry Ford stumbled upon an article about a revolutionary invention, a silent gas engine. At first, he dismissed it, believing it was too weak to be a viable power source. However, fate intervened a couple of years later when a company approached him to repair one of these engines. This experience transformed Henry's understanding of gasoline combustion. The engine produced far more energy than he had ever imagined and was surprisingly lightweight. In that moment, he realized he had discovered the key to powering his horseless vehicle. Excited by this breakthrough, Henry turned to his fiancée, Clara, and suggested they move back to Detroit so he could deepen his knowledge of gasoline engines. Fortuitously, Clara agreed. Little did she know, Henry had already accepted a job as a repairman with the Edison Illuminating Company just a week prior. Working for Thomas Edison, one of his lifelong heroes, felt like a dream come true. This position offered him invaluable hands-on experience with gasoline engines, and Henry quickly made a name for himself. He impressed his superiors and soon climbed the ranks to become chief engineer, doubling his pay to $80 a week. The beauty of his new role was that it was on call, giving Henry the freedom to explore his own ideas, particularly his vision for a horseless carriage, which he now knew was achievable with a gasoline engine. During a company retreat, he finally met Thomas Edison himself, who encouraged Henry to keep pursuing his ambitious dreams. Their encounter would lay the foundation for a lasting friendship. In 1888, Henry and Clara married, and by 1893, they welcomed their only child, Edsel. That same year, on a magical Christmas Eve, Henry burst into their home, excitedly telling Clara he had finally built his first gasoline engine. Admittedly, it was still quite rudimentary, only capable of running for a minute. But after years of tinkering, the breakthrough had come. With this newfound knowledge, he could finally focus on his dream, creating his first horseless carriage. For the next 3 years, Henry poured his heart and soul into this project, scavenging parts that would have been discarded by factories, including leftover tubing. By 1896, his hard work culminated in the quadricycle, a quirky vehicle crafted from 2 bicycles welded to a square chassis. On June 4, 1896, it took its inaugural drive, and to Henry's delight, the car ran smoothly. Although other inventors had created gas-powered automobiles, Henry's quadricycle stood out, boasting a top speed of 20 miles per hour, one of the fastest of its time. Yet Henry knew this was just the beginning. He sold the quadricycle for $200, using the money to fund the development of his second model. Over the next 3 years, he enhanced the vehicle, making it larger, faster, and more reliable. But as he stood on the brink of greatness, he felt a familiar frustration. He was desperate to invent full-time, yet financial constraints loomed over him. To pursue his passion, he needed investors willing to take a risk on his vision. In 1899, Henry seized an opportunity to impress a wealthy lumber salesman with a 3.5-mile test drive. By the end of the journey, the salesman was so captivated by Henry's creation that he eagerly agreed to invest in Henry's new venture. With this success, Henry attracted a total of 12 investors and raised $15,000, leading to the founding of the Detroit Automotive Company in August 1899, with Henry appointed as chief engineer. However, the landscape was challenging. While many brands of horseless carriages existed, they were all handmade and prohibitively expensive, serving only as luxury items for the affluent. Henry's vision was to create efficient, high-quality vehicles that everyday people could afford. Unfortunately, his investors had other ideas. They wanted a quick turnaround on a variety of vehicles, aiming for high profits by targeting wealthy hobbyists, often at the expense of quality. This created a constant tug-of-war between Henry and his shareholders, who grew increasingly frustrated with production delays. While they pressed for higher profits, Henry remained steadfast in his pursuit of perfection. Despite mastering the art of building automobiles, Henry Ford still struggled with the business side of things. His expertise lay in crafting vehicles one at a time, pouring meticulous care into each creation. However, his shareholders had other ideas. They pressured him to mass-produce cars at a quality he was unhappy with and at prices he couldn't justify. Unsurprisingly, the public echoed his concerns. Consumers found the vehicles overpriced and lacking in quality. Consequently, the Detroit Automobile Company faced significant financial challenges, and within just 2 years of its grand opening in 1901, it was dissolved. But even in the face of failure, Henry had forged valuable connections in the city. Some friends who owned a warehouse offered him a space to continue his inventive pursuits. Although his first venture had collapsed, this new opportunity provided him with the freedom to focus on what truly ignited his passion, creating his own race car. Unlike his previous endeavors, this time he could dedicate time to a single project. Henry believed that many racers were overly focused on sheer power. Instead, he was convinced that a lighter car would outperform the competition. So he began developing a lightweight 26-horsepower racer, a decision that would lead him to victory in a tense competition at the Detroit Driving Club. Henry's triumphs in racing brought him newfound fame and caught the attention of former shareholders from the failed Detroit Automobile Company. They realized that with Henry's recent success on the racetrack, perhaps it was time to give their partnership another shot. Thus, the Henry Ford Company was born, with the aim of producing lightweight city cars. However, Henry's obsession with racing began to overshadow the company's goals. Instead of focusing on passenger vehicles and profitability, he fixated on maximizing the mechanical prowess of individual race cars. Once again, his relentless pursuit of perfection put him at odds with the investors, who grew increasingly frustrated and ultimately replaced him as chief engineer. With Henry's departure from the Henry Ford Company, he signed a contract that granted him rights to his name for $900, along with the designs for the 4-cylinder racer he had been developing. The company needed a new identity, and thus it rebranded itself as the Cadillac Automobile Company, which would go on to achieve tremendous commercial success. Now back on his own, Henry faced the daunting challenge of bouncing back after 2 business failures. But giving up was never in his nature. He returned to the racing scene, and in 1901, he unveiled the groundbreaking Ford 999, a car that dominated the competition. Just 2 years later, its next iteration shattered American driving records, reaching a top speed of 56 miles per hour. This string of victories not only elevated Henry Ford's reputation, but also attracted a wave of investors eager to collaborate with him. They recognized the potential to transform his innovative mind and inventions into a profitable venture, leading to the establishment of his third and final business endeavor, the Ford Motor Company, in 1903. While cars remained a luxury reserved for the wealthy, Henry Ford was determined to change that. He famously declared, "I will build a motor car for the great multitude." His new company's inaugural vehicle was the Model A, a 2-cylinder, 8-horsepower passenger car, which debuted at a price of $750 just before Henry's 40th birthday. Although it was a promising start, the manufacturing process was slow. At a factory on Mack Avenue in Detroit, A small team of workers painstakingly crafted only 2 or 3 cars each day, all by hand. Everything transformed when Henry visited a slaughterhouse in Chicago. There, he witnessed an ingenious system. Cow carcasses moved along an automatic conveyor belt as workers completed specific tasks, each one contributing to the larger process like cogs in a well-oiled machine. Inspired, Henry decided to adopt the assembly line concept for his own factories. He divided the production process into a series of small, repeatable tasks, assigning workers to focus on just one job each. No skilled experience required. The impact was revolutionary. Factory efficiency skyrocketed by an astonishing 500%. Henry was able to rapidly expand his workforce, hiring 300 new employees, many of whom were low-skilled laborers who could perform these repetitive tasks. But Henry didn't stop there. Drawing from his own experiences with production delays caused by missing parts, he implemented a new strategy: manufacturing individual car parts in-house. This included everything from engines to transmissions, further accelerating production time. Where it once took Henry 2.5 days to build a single car, it now took only 90 minutes. This monumental progress paved the way for the launch of the Model T, which would become one of the most successful cars in history. Henry's vision was clear. He wanted the Model T to be affordable, durable, and easy to operate. He achieved this by ensuring that every Model T rolled off the assembly line with interchangeable parts and a uniform shade of black paint. Each vehicle came with a detailed instruction manual, empowering owners to understand and repair their cars themselves. The Model T quickly became a bestseller, generating immense profits for the company and allowing for even greater production scale. By 1914, Henry was selling more cars than all other American manufacturers combined. Before long, Fords dominated the roads, and in a surprising twist, Henry began steadily decreasing the price of the Model T. While this tactic defied traditional business logic, Henry understood that lowering the price would attract even more buyers, solidifying the Model T's status as the most popular choice among consumers. By the end of its production run, an astonishing 15 million Model Ts had been sold. However, a significant challenge emerged. Many of Henry's workers became increasingly disillusioned with their jobs. The shift from assembling entire cars by hand to performing monotonous, repetitive tasks on the assembly line stripped away their sense of craftsmanship and skill. As a result, the Ford Motor Company faced a staggering turnover rate of 380%, a problem that could spell disaster for the company's future. Back to Henry Ford, he did something radical that transformed the labor landscape. He doubled his workers' pay from $2.50 to an astonishing $5 a day, a significant wage during that era, far exceeding what other companies offered. But he didn't stop there. Recognizing that many of his workers were immigrants, Henry provided free English lessons to help them communicate more effectively on the factory floor. He also reduced the workday from 9 hours to 8 and introduced a 5-day work week, granting employees weekends off, a revolutionary change at a time when most workers were lucky to get just Sundays off. These groundbreaking decisions ruffled feathers among his shareholders, who were outraged, feeling that money was being taken out of their pockets and given to the workers for no good reason. Henry stood firm, explaining his theory that happier, more rested employees would be more productive. He argued that higher wages would attract a larger pool of workers. His strategy worked. Soon, workers from across the nation flocked to Ford's factories in Detroit, leading to an economic boom for the city and forcing competitors to adopt similar policies to retain their employees. Moreover, by reducing the work hours, Henry could add a third 8-hour shift to the schedule, allowing the factory to operate 24/7. While these changes seemed radical at the time, they laid the foundation for the modern 8-hour workday and 5-day work week that many businesses still follow today. However, Henry's shareholders were not on board with these progressive changes. They demanded he stop increasing wages, and when he refused, they took him to court, accusing him of intentionally costing them money and breaching his duties as a shareholder. Henry felt his hard-earned business slipping away. After all the struggles and setbacks, he couldn't afford to start over again. Knowing he had to regain control of his company, in 1906, Henry made a bold move. Using his personal savings, he purchased enough stock to raise his ownership stake to 51%, making him the majority owner and controlling shareholder. It was a high-stakes gamble, but Henry was betting on himself, and he was determined to steer the company in the direction he believed was right. In 1919, Henry Ford handed over the leadership of the Ford Motor Company to his son, Edsel, naming him president. However, Henry still held the reins behind the scenes, making most of the crucial decisions. Edsel frequently urged his father to modernize the company, presenting new plans and proposals each day. Yet Henry responded with harsh criticism, often resorting to shouting and insults, insisting that the Model T was all customers wanted. To keep Edsel out of the office, Henry even instructed upper management to send him on week-long trips across the country. However, Edsel's instincts about changing market demands were right. Year after year, sales of the Model T dwindled. The prosperity of the 1920s and the availability of cheap credit created a public demand for more stylish and luxurious cars, which competitors like General Motors and Chrysler were eager to fulfill. Finally, in 1927, Henry could no longer ignore the declining sales and reluctantly agreed to develop a new vehicle. Ford introduced a revamped version of the Model A, which featured the first commercial V8 engine and came in 4 different colors. Unfortunately, by the time the Ford Motor Company was ready to sell the new Model A, it had already fallen to 3rd place among U.S. car manufacturers, trailing behind Chrysler and General Motors. Soon after, the Great Depression hit, forcing Ford to lay off many workers and reduce the high wages for which the company was known. Despite claiming to be a champion of the people, Henry resorted to extreme measures when he learned that some employees were attempting to unionize. He employed a secret police force to spy on workers and rooted out union organizers, even going so far as to have them beaten. When protests erupted, Henry ordered police to quell them, resulting in the tragic deaths of 4 workers during what became known as the Ford Massacre. Things took an even more controversial turn in the late 1920s when Henry bought millions of acres of land in Brazil in one of the most remote places on Earth. At that time, the synthetic rubber market was virtually non-existent, but rubber was essential for the mass production of cars. To secure a reliable source, Henry established a rubber plantation in the Brazilian jungle, aiming to harvest rubber trees and ship the material back to Detroit for tires and other parts. But Henry had grander ambitions than just rubber production. He envisioned a utopia modeled after the rural America of his youth, a self-sufficient town in the heart of the jungle where all the workers on his rubber plantation would live. He named it Fordlandia, and it included homes, shops, a school, a hospital, a golf course, and of course, a processing plant for the rubber. In total, it housed over 7,000 individuals. Fordlandia was a massive undertaking, converting 2 million acres of jungle into a highly modernized plantation capable of large-scale rubber production. However, Henry imposed strict and controversial rules enforced by American managers. Alcohol, tobacco, and even playing sports were banned within the community, and a police force ensured compliance. Soon, Fordlandia faced numerous challenges, including adverse weather, disease outbreaks, worker discontent, and environmental calamities. These issues signaled that the venture was heading toward failure. Yet despite the mounting problems, Henry continued to pour millions into the project. Ultimately, a devastating disease crippled the town's workforce and rubber production. Discontent among workers led to open revolt, and Henry had to acknowledge that Fordlandia was a costly mistake. He ultimately sold the plantation to the Brazilian government for a mere $250,000, a fraction of his total investment. Today, the deserted ruins of Fordlandia stand as a stark reminder of Henry Ford's ambitious but misguided vision of a jungle utopia. As Henry Ford grew older, he developed a troubling obsession with Jewish people, blaming them for many of society's ills. A close friend recalled him saying, "The Jew caused the war. The Jew caused the outbreak of thievery and robbery in the country. The Jew even caused insufficiencies in the Navy." In an effort to spread his hatred, Ford funded newspapers that published anti-Semitic articles, including a weekly segment titled, "The International Jew, the World's Problem." Through aggressive marketing strategies, this publication reached a peak readership of 700,000 weekly. Over time, Ford published more than 60 articles attacking Jews, later compiling them into 4 books. One of these works was cited as an inspiration by the Nazi Party, with Adolf Hitler himself calling Ford a great personal inspiration. Hitler claimed to have a life-size portrait of Ford in his office and distributed Ford's writings throughout Germany, even mentioning him by name in Mein Kampf. In 1938, the Nazi Party honored Henry Ford with the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the highest award given to foreigners. Ford accepted the medal with pride, recognized for his alignment with Nazi ideals and his devotion to their cause. Ford's connection to Nazism extended even further. A U.S. Army report from 1945 revealed that the German branch of the Ford Motor Company, still under Henry Ford's control, functioned as an arsenal for the Nazis during the war. While many American companies withdrew from Germany at the onset of World War II, Ford continued operations at its German plants. American soldiers reported it was strange to see Germans, America's enemies, driving Ford automobiles into battle. There are also reports that Ford utilized slave labor from concentration camps to manufacture cars and trucks for the Nazis. What becomes clear is that Henry Ford was not merely anti-Semitic, he was a significant and influential force in the global spread of anti-Semitism. In 1943, Henry's son Edsel passed away from stomach cancer, having never truly seen his vision for the Ford Motor Company realized. Despite Edsel's position, it was Henry who remained in control of the company and its direction. Henry Ford's grandson has claimed that the immense stress and hardship caused by Henry's behavior ultimately contributed to Edsel's declining health, leading to his premature death. Henry Ford himself passed away in 1947 at the age of 83, leaving the Ford Motor Company reeling from the loss of its founder without a clear direction forward. In the wake of Henry's death, his grandson took control of the company, remaining at the helm until 1979. While Henry Ford had single-handedly led the company for 39 years, the Ford Motor Company would experience 13 leadership changes over the next 41 years. Despite this turnover, the automotive giant continued to find commercial success, building on the foundation laid by Henry to produce best-selling cars like the Thunderbird, Mustang, and countless other classics. However, it never regained the dominant position it once held under its original leader. Henry Ford remains a divisive figure in the company's history. On one hand, he was a genius and innovator who pioneered the assembly line production method and improved working conditions for many. On the other hand, he was brutal toward unions, held racist and anti-Semitic views, and actively spread hatred that caused significant harm. In response to his legacy, the Ford Motor Company agreed to a $5 billion settlement in 2001, providing reparations for its use of Jewish slave labor in concentration camps during World War II. In recent years, the company has shifted its focus toward fuel-efficient vehicles and electric hybrids. In July 2023, the U.S. Department of Energy announced a historic $9.2 billion loan to Ford for the development of fully electric vehicles, the largest loan ever in the auto industry, valued at over $50 billion today. This places Ford among the 10 largest car companies in the world. It's easy to forget that the Ford Motor Company began with a single farm boy's dream of creating a new kind of machine. While Henry Ford remains a complex and controversial figure, there's no denying that he changed the world and transformed the way we do business.